lot to talk about, so now let's bring in Mike Warren, staff writer for the Weekly Standard. You have a new column out, Mike. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk about the GOP candidates now courting the evangelical vote. We talked about this a little bit earlier with Newsmax's John Gizzi. You write that, quote, among the presidential candidates, Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz are offering competing models for maintaining and growing a critical part of the GOP's coalition in the primaries and the general election. Both strategies show promise in peril. So let's start with the promise of Ted Cruz's tact on this. What do you think?
Well, I actually filed this piece before the Supreme Court's gay marriage ruling, but I think it makes it even stronger for the Ted Cruz argument, which is that there are a number of social conservatives, many of them evangelicals or conservative Catholics, who are sort of shocked by what happened with the Supreme Court. And you're seeing Ted Cruz, address this issue, and I think there's promise for a Republican candidate to sort of say, look, we're going to focus on religious liberty, fighting back against this imperious Supreme Court on these social issues, because there's a sizable part of the Republican base. The peril of Cruz's argument is that popular opinion overall in the general population is going against where the more conservative Christian evangelical, whatever you want to call it, base is on these issues. But then again, if those voters aren't motivated to come out in 2016, Republicans are going to have a real problem in some of those swing states where blue-collar voters really make the difference between Republicans winning and losing.
All right, let's talk about the promise of Jeb's kind of what can we do strategy here now. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, Jeb Bush is a Catholic himself and talks openly and a lot about his Catholic faith informing him as a politician. What he does is and he's not the only Republican to do this, is he talks more broadly in terms of shared Christian values. This is a way, in many ways, to get Christians who vote Republican but aren't necessarily motivated by social issues first or primarily. I don't think anybody believes Jeb Bush is not a social conservative. In fact, he was one of the leaders in Florida when he was governor on the Terri Schiavo case and not pulling her feeding tube, and he's got a very good pro-life record as well. But the issue here is sort of pivoting to a general election, and Jeb Bush is saying, let's see what we can do to reach out to maybe Christians who aren't motivated by these social issues, but who might be motivated by economic issues as well. We have something to say about that. The problem is, if he doesn't give enough attention to the social issues and make an issue, perhaps out of this Supreme Court case, he's going to have a lot of those evangelicals staying home if he's the nominee.
Well, let's take a listen, because that has always been kind of the knock on Jeb as he runs the GOP primary, that he's running a general election campaign and not a primary campaign. Let's listen to what Jeb had to say to CBS News on the issue.
I think in the case of same-sex marriage, I do think that marriage, I'm informed by my faith about this, and I believe in traditional marriage. I think now we need to focus on two things. How do we create an environment where people aren't discriminated against, where we respect people's commitment to long-term loving relationships, and where we also allow people to act on their religious conscience.
Now, on a political campaign, can you have it both ways? Can you make both of those statements?
I think you can. It's not an easy task for a politician. Jeb Bush, maybe he is up for the task. I think that he maybe doesn't always excite the conservative base. He doesn't get them excited and raring to go and getting their fellow church members, for instance, out to the polls. But perhaps he is striking that balance. That's kind of the question that my piece leaves open, is whether or not him or perhaps another candidate, someone like John Kasich, or even someone maybe more middle of the pack like Marco Rubio and Scott Walker can strike a balance that doesn't sound too harsh to that independent voter who maybe isn't entirely motivated by gay marriage, isn't quite sure how they feel about the Supreme Court issue, but cares more about sort of how to move forward.
All right, well, Mike, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. We do have a commercial break.